everybody, and welcome to Strip Search, the comic strip podcast for August of 2022. I'm Pete Chianca, and as always, I am here with Dave London. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Pete.
Welcome back. I understand you just returned from vacation. The great Western United States.
Hiking in Yosemite, where the fire was not.
Well, that's good. It's good you managed to avoid the fire.
Somebody out there said that in Northern California, for the four seasons, winter, spring, fall. So now instead of summer, they just call it fire season.
Yes, winter, spring, summer, fire. Well, we are glad Dave got back in one piece, not at all charred, because we have a very, very special episode. In fact, we're going to be talking to Bob Eckstein, who is one of the most prolific cartoonists, speakers, teachers, authors. This guy has a lot to talk about. So we're going to dispense with our usual banter. Sorry to disappoint the banter fans. More banter next time, we promise. But we know he is going to have a lot to say. So we're going to get right to that in mere moments. Unless, Dave, do you have anything else that you need to tell our esteemed audience?
I am good. Let's get to Bob.
All right. Stay tuned. In mere seconds, we will be back with Bob Eckstein. Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strip Search, the comic strip podcast with me, Pete Chianca, and my co-host, Dave London. This is the part we love, welcoming our very special guest, and we really do mean special this time around. We're really excited about this. By way of introduction, Bob Eckstein is an award-winning writer, New Yorker cartoonist, and author of the New York Times best-selling Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores. His cartoons have appeared in Barron's, Mad, McSweeney's, National Lampoon, The New Yorker, The New York Times. I could go on all day, many others. And he's also been nominated twice for the National Cartoonist Society's Gag Cartoonist of the Year. He is the editor of the Ultimate Cartoon Book by the World's Greatest Cartoonist series, has been contributing editor at Writer's Digest, and teaches at NYU. Welcome, Bob Eckstein, to Strip Search.
Wow, great intro. I love it.
I think you wrote most of that, but I cobbled it together well, I thought.
Well, no, thanks for having me on the show. This is great. Looking forward to chatting cartoons.
Yeah, I mean, and you, we love talking to cartoonists, and I know that's something you also enjoy, and you have done so many different kinds of cartooning and writing, and have your hands in so many different things. And we're going to get into a lot of that. But I wanted to mention right out of the gate, you have a new project, a new book that is literally just out as we tape this at the beginning of August. You have managed to come up with 113 pages about how to name your cat. And not only that, but it's hilarious. You were nice enough to share a copy with us, and I was reading some of the sections to my wife the other night, and she was almost literally on the floor. I was actually a little jealous. She never laughs that hard at any of my stuff. So tell us a little bit about how this came to be, and what people can expect from it.
No, thank you for letting me share this new book. I'm very excited about it. But I also want to get into a little bit why our spouses never laugh at our own work. This is something I hear from other cartoonists all the time. My wife, I've been trying to get her to laugh for years now. And isn't that always the case? It's like they know your whole story.
Right, they've heard it all. They know all the shit.
They know it. And it's like we're trying to crack that code. Once in a while, I still work at it now. I mean, and I tell you, this is how I got started in humor to begin with, was trying to get my family to laugh at the dinner table. It was like such a tough audience.
There's got to be a joke in that, like a gag cartoon, like Michelangelo's wife looking at Dave going, eh.
I like that, Dave. Very good.
Beethoven's wife giving like the thumbs down.
Right.
It's so true. But so to get back to the question of why I did this, I mean, we all did a lot of crazy things during the pandemic, didn't we?
That's a good point.
I found myself writing about a lot of weird things. At some point, I was coming up with these lists for cat names, and I was having so much fun. And I started sharing it with friends. I kept on saying things like, so come up with a name for a cat, like for a Hollywood star. I say James Spaded or something like that. I just like natural, just come up with jokes and like flex our humor muscles. And the next thing I knew, I said, you know what? There's a book here. It's hard enough to sell books. I'm always trying to come up with books I think people are going to like, do about subjects that people I think are going to gravitate toward. And I mean, that's what it's all about, communicating, trying to come up with something that brings people together, makes them laugh. Maybe a part of me feels also it's a very marketable idea, but I swear to you, it really was a lot to do with what could reach the most amount of people for fun. I mean, I'm certainly not going to become, really rich with a book. I had done already 9 or 10 of her books before, and I kind of know the system. It's not easy. So you might as well just do what you enjoy doing.
Yep.
If something comes of it that, you make some money, great. But instead, I just try to make it a fun project. And this was a really fun project. And I had some stuff laying around, a lot of cat cartoons, cat fun facts, and some good cat advice.
Now, you mentioned too that you talked to friends about it. Was it a collaborative project in some ways, in terms of people making suggestions of cat names or asking you about their cat name?
A lot of it was being nice to people who wanted to help but didn't have good ideas. But there was a lot of good names too. But ultimately, it was up to me to kind of edit it and decide like what to my ear sounded like good names, because you couldn't put down every cat name. There's like endless amounts. So we have here the best few thousand, and actually get people off the ground.
It's literally infinite, the number of.
Yeah, it's infinite, and people did help a little bit, but I had to use my judgment regarding like making it not fatiguing to the reader. I knew that this could be really fatiguing. So you got to make it so you throw in some stuff, throw in a puzzle, throw in a cartoon like every other page. And there's about four.
I was just saying, the cat cartoons are a huge highlight for me. Your own cat cartoons. Why are cats such a fertile cartoon subject?
Because you could make them do anything you want in a cartoon. I mean, we all could do that now with people and stuff, but with cats or something like with inanimate object, you could go even further with it and do anything and give them a personality that no one could have imagined. So it's a clean slate, and they're comical, they're not really evil. So it really is, it's right there for the picking.
So Bob, you've gone to cats now, but you used to be very much into snowmen. Have you given up the snowmen for the cats, or what's on the horizon for the snowmen?
No, that's just another example of trying to come up with something that if I walked in the store, what would I want? That's how the bookstore book came about. That's how the snowman book came about. That's what I liked at the moment. What would people like to kind of read? And the snowman thing was also a fascination with mysteries. In that case, the mystery I was trying to solve was who made the first snowman? So I had spent like 7 years traveling around the world. And with that was very much a collaboratory thing. I had professors and art historians helping piece together the puzzle of when man first made snowmen. But I just felt like that would be a great holiday book, in the same way that I thought that a cat book that was just flat out trying to be funny would be good. I mean, there are some funny books out there for cat lovers, like I Pee on This as a poetry book for cats. And the guy who wrote that's actually a friend who lives across the way. So he was a bit of an inspiration. And then there's another book called Bad Cats. And Bad Cats is by another friend who I play tennis with. And his book sold millions of copies, but it was a very limited type of format. And I thought it would be fun to go even a little bit further and try to do something that was a parody of baby name books.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I loved about it. And actually, before you were going to try to share your screen for our viewers, we offer this podcast because we like to please on audio and video. And the video obviously gives us an opportunity to see a little of the work. You want to show us a little bit of your?
Yeah, I'd love to do this. This is a
Now,
podcast exclusive. And this is getting a chance to share some of the cartoons that are in the book. As I said, there's some of my favorite cartoons in the book. But I think we could talk about cartooning as well. I mean, cross over to not just pet lovers, but to cartoon lovers too.
What
No.
about, so maybe tell us a little about what the germination for the idea of the cartoon we're looking at here.
Exactly, Dave. That's what I would like to do is explain it. This didn't just come about in an afternoon, but this is something that actually took a couple of years before I came up to this final version. This began in different ways and kept on changing. Initially, this was maybe, I'm trying to think, the very first one was maybe movers and shakers. And there was two trucks, one said movers, one said shakers. So that's a good starting point, not very strong, but got my creative juices flowing as to how else I can make this more predictable. That's usually what happens with my cartoons is it starts off sort of predictable. And then I ask myself, how could this be more of a twist? How could I push the envelope so that the ending, the kicker, is totally unpredictable? At one time I had a motorcycle with a little kid, and they were both Grim Reapers. There was an adult Grim Reaper and a small one. And I think it was the Grim Reaper takes his son to work. And you had a car coming around the corner. And that was a little gruesome and a little bit too much of a setup. So I kept on looking for ways of simplifying it, being a more abstract, being more unpredictable. So that's why I came up with this. I have other examples too, where I use the same principles of the cartoon starting off someplace safe, and then I just try to twist it and add an ending that adds something that was totally what you didn't expect, and a release of tension and hopefully laughter.
and for the viewers who are not viewers but are in fact just listening, can you describe what we're looking at here?
Oh, I forgot to mention. You're right. I'm an idiot. That's right. There's people who are not seeing this. There's we have a cliff scene in which the mountain, the roadside mountain, has a truck that's a milk truck coming around one corner, not seeing that there's another truck coming around that's labeled truckload of cats, and there's all these little cats climbing out of the truck.
I love truckloads of anything, but truckload of cats is especially funny.
And I just like to point out that the far cliff does not have the protective railing on it. So I caught that.
See what I did there? I'm adding tension. Now, what I would have done normally, a step before this would have been that the truck load of cats. A logical way of doing this joke would have been a truck labeled cookies. So you have milk and cookies. And that makes sense, and it's okay, but I'm going for something that's just a little more special and in a way that no one else would have came up with. You know, right now it's very popular to do caption contests. Yep. And as I watch all the entries come in, I try to think to myself, what would be an entry that no one else could come up with? What's a totally original solution to a setup? And if I do a cartoon that I think could possibly be a cartoon caption entry or even winner, I know I haven't really pushed the envelope enough. If I could imagine someone else coming up with the idea, I realize that I didn't give this enough thought.
Yeah, and I remember when I used to do the New Yorker caption contest more regularly, and there were several times I thought that I had that original idea, and then when they upload everybody's responses, I saw it 47 other times. Said, maybe this wasn't as original as I thought.
Well, it's possible, Peter, that you did have the best caption. You didn't win, and winning is totally different than saying you're the best caption. What cartoons appear in magazines are not necessarily the best cartoons, but as artists, we are trying to do our best work, and we're not trying to win the caption contest per se, unless that's exactly your agenda at that moment. But really, winning that contest is different than really coming up with the best caption. The best caption, as I just mentioned on another podcast, the caption contest, I was explaining that the entries that win often lack some grace. That lack of grace in the writing or even in the setup also means there's an absence of timing. There's not that comic timing is missing as a result. Instead, it's just trying to go from point A to B in the quickest distance, which normally is a rule that we all try to abide by. The smaller the caption, the more effective it is. All right, that's true sometimes, but the really great cartoons have grace. There's a timing to it. There isn't a rush. They have a certain way about them, an essence about them, that they don't feel rushed. At least that's my theory.
As Steve Martin once said, comedy is all about timing. Timing. Sorry. Yes.
Here, we could fix that in edit.
That's an actual Steve Martin joke from 1977. Oh, good. Here we see the cover to the complete book of cat names. I meant to ask before we started, Dave, you don't have any cats, do you? You just have dogs.
I used to have a cat. We had a 16-year-old cat who went to little cat heaven. We now have 2 dogs.
What was your cat's name?
Ripley.
Ripley.
Named after Ripley from the Alien movie, not after, believe it or not.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Dave, do you have to explain it every time you're asked that?
I do explain it because, Ripley from the Alien movie is a much better homage.
There's a little panache to your cat.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an homage to Ripley.
And the movie Alien had a cat in it, right? There's a little.
She did. Ripley in Aliens did have a cat. Yeah.
Now, Bob, my cat's name was in your book under the music section. Our cat is named Bruce after Bruce Springsteen. He cost us $5,000. No, I'm just kidding. That's a ticket joke. But he is named after Bruce Springsteen. But after reading your book, now I wish I had named him Cat Benatar, because that was one of my favorites on that list.
Now, was Cat Benatar in the book?
Well, yes, Cat Benatar was in the book.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't read the book yet. I did have everyone sent out, and no, I did write the book, but the thing is this is the truth. I can't remember. I had lists that went into the thousands. So obviously I don't remember exactly when people ask me, is this one in the book? It could be. I don't know. I can't remember exactly. There were just chock full of information in that book, and I didn't remember everything. This is actually a loose sketch from the book too. I'll describe it. We have someone arriving at an airport, and when everyone holds up their signs to get a driver, there's a cat holding up a sign that says loser. And the passenger his caption is, worst emotional cat ever. So it's a little bit of a low-hanging fruit, but
the loser, by the way, the name loser has the E reversed. Why is it when animals write in English, they always reverse one of the letters?
They get it so close.
Yeah, a lot of the cats have not gone past 4th grade, so that's the reason for that. We have another scene here. I just changed the cartoon for those who can't see. We have an office setting, and obviously a cat has come in for an interview. Very blasé cat, and the interviewer is asking the cat, and I suppose you want a corner office with windows. Now, this is not the cartoon that's in the book. This cartoon was cut. This is not a good cartoon. This is just an example of what I would do. I would go through the captions over and over, and maybe try 10 different captions over the course of months until I know it clicks. And I know it will work when I see it. And I knew, for instance, that this doesn't work and it would never make it in the book. Ultimately, the final caption is, and so where do you see yourself in 5 minutes?
That is better.
Better. But you develop an ear for things. Moving on quickly, this is I have an illustration here of a snowman and igloo, and it was in the show because we were going to talk about snowmen, and we could touch upon that later. But I know one of the questions you were going to ask me is, who are some of my favorite cartoonists. And that person shows up next. So I'm going to share that right now. And this is Sam Gross, one of my close friends. And we have a cat. One cat is helping a mouse from the mousehold doing some knitting. And the other cat's asking, have you no shame? Sam is a person responsible for me being a cartoonist. When I was doing the Snowman book, I had asked him to do some cartoons for my book. I knew nothing about gag cartoons, but I knew I wanted an intermission in my book because my book was so academic and it needed something to break it up. And I thought, why not have an intermission in a book? And I've never seen that. So I had Sam Gross, another New Yorker cartoonist like Michael Maslin, do some cartoons that were Snowman cartoons. I ran out of money. I had run out of money already because I was traveling around everywhere for research. And the book was costing me upwards of $22,000 for photo permissions and travel expenses. I had spent a small fortune on the book. So I had some space left in the book because I ran out of money from the cartoon bank where I spent a lot. And I made some gag cartoons myself. I put them in, and those were my first cartoons. Sam and I became friends. And for my birthday, he took me to one of the New Yorker lunches. And we went to lunch with all the other great cartoonists like Gaham Wilson and Leo Cullum and people who I'd seen in the magazine. I had a great time, and I asked if I could come back. And Sam said, sure. And he dared me to try to do a batch of cartoons for the New Yorker. I had a hard time coming up with a batch of cartoons in the next week, but in a couple of weeks I returned and he introduced me to Bob Mankoff. So there you go. I'm indebted to Sam.
And I feel like his name has come up before as an influence from people we've spoken to. People really just, truly appreciate his work.
Yeah, he's truly one of the greatest living cartoonists. And we became close friends after that. I got into the New Yorker when he brought me in. So he's responsible for me being a cartoonist. And at that moment, I abandoned my freelance illustration career pretty much. I mean, it was going to disappear anyway because I was working for magazines and newspapers. And just about that time, which was 2007, things were getting a little bit shaky across the board for illustrators.
And anybody else affiliated with the newspaper business or magazines.
So here's one more cartoon I have of Sam's, and a cat is destroying a chair, scratching it and ruining the upholstery. And there's a family talking off to the side, commenting on the activity. And someone says, we believe in a former life, she was an editor. That's a personal favorite.
As someone who has done that job for many years, I can relate.
Yeah, I was a cartoon editor for a while too. I love this cartoon for a few reasons, because it's got a cat in it and it's got a reference to writing. And I'm the cartoonist for Writing Digest magazine. And so I'm always doing writing cartoons. I teach writing. I even lecture on the subject. So that's really my wheelhouse, but also because this drawing is done so beautifully. It's not overdone, but it's funny and it has all the information you need to get the joke across. It's not heavy-handed. It's not hamming it up or stealing the stage. There's a lot of lessons that can be learned by just staring at this one cartoon. Everything you want to know about cartooning is right here in this one cartoon. And anybody could look it up by going to the cartoonstock.com, where Sam Gross's cartoons are, and mine as well. And you could look up Cat Cartoon by Sam Gross and also put in the word editor, and you'll come up with the cartoon we're discussing if you can't see it now.
So just by way of example, would the background just enough to set where this is happening without too much background be an example of the layout that you would you would teach as how to draw a good gag?
Right. It's hard for me to simplify and say what's working here because a lot of decisions were made to make this work. You have simple lines. You have decisions not to add distractions. An example is this, and I don't mean to beat up on other cartoonists, but there are some cartoonists who would handle the same setting much differently. For instance, the painting that exists in the background makes it clear that this is just a dwelling of a family, but there's no detail to the picture that distracts from the joke. And not only that, it's rendered in a softer tone, so it's not taking away from where Sam wants her eye to go. This composition is exquisite. The way your eye is going from one place to the other, it's all laid out just right, so he knows exactly where he wants us to go, and the timing is right. For instance, if you flip this over and you have the person talking on the left, and then you see the action on the right-hand side, well, that ruins the joke. The joke works now because we're seeing the cat do his thing, and now we're curious to know what the observation is going to be. And then even the timing exists in the caption where the kicker is the word editor. We already know that we kind of foresee something happening in a former life she was, and it's going to be something funny. But few people would have guessed the word editor. And now we're just making another leap. And what he does there is, because it's not so obvious, he's engaging the viewer. He's engaging the viewer because it's up to the reader to figure it out. The reader's got to participate and have their own eureka moment in which they figure out, oh, they get what they mean by that. If it was so obvious, the reader's not doing any work themselves, and then they don't feel satisfied themselves that they played a role in this cartoon being successful. This cartoon makes the reader subconsciously feel like they had a part in it, because it took someone intelligent and well-read to recognize the point of the joke.
That's an excellent point, and I don't think I've ever heard it explained quite that way about the reader's role in making the joke work. Because I think people are used to having things spoon-fed to them to a certain extent. But you're right; it's much more satisfying if you have to work a little bit to.
Yeah, and oh, Peter, do you think that's because maybe it's we wouldn't ask that from youngsters and kids cartoons, but if we're going to divide kids cartoons from adult cartoons, that's the division right there, is that we expect the adults to now bring something to the table, and they have got to figure it out. And on a small level, it's almost a puzzle, and they do have to have a eureka moment as opposed to a child.
It's true. Although I remember reading Peanuts as a kid, and when there were certain ones I didn't get, and when I did, I was very happy with myself. You know, if Snoopy used a word I wasn't familiar with, or I think Schultz was very good about not sort of pandering in that way. Let the kids figure it out.
Well, now you're talking about a genius.
Well, right.
Sam's a genius, and Charles Schultz is a genius too. The thing is what Charles Schultz does is his cartoons can work on two levels. It can work on the level that it engages the children to love these characters. And then for the adults, they could see how the artist, Mr. Schultz, is making a metaphor or saying something even deeper. Now, the same thing is happening here with Sam. Sam's cartoon with the cat is going to appeal to children because this kitty is adorable. And seeing it destroy the couch is enough for kids to enjoy it. And they might not get the rest of the joke, but there's something for them too. So it works on both levels. And those are two guys, we're talking about two masters of the craft who can do multiple things in a cartoon that I can only strive for. It's really excellent.
Yeah. Why don't we describe this cartoon that's up now that I'm chuckling at?
Well, thanks. Well, this cartoon is a ski lift. And on the ski lift coming down from the mountain is a skier who looks a lot like Moses holding two tablets. Now, this cartoon, the thing that I like most about this cartoon is how I treated the background. The background is just a swath of wash and 2 or 3 little marks to indicate trees and a horizon line. And it's an example of how I try to simplify, but also add some beauty and just bring it down to its simplest forms so it doesn't distract from the actual joke in the foreground.
And it's, you know, as someone who can't draw and is a word guy, I'm especially impressed by captionless panels that make me laugh.
And
Okay.
I
You
think
wanna
also
talk about how you
the
do that.
the skier going on the uphill, or the you know, the guy going in the other direction also helps set the setting. In addition, I do like the wash with the trees, but the back of the, you know, the skier with his arm hanging over the back of the you know, the chair. That
Now,
also helps.
Now, Dave, a couple of years earlier, I would have done a poor job executing this. I just didn't know. I had to learn from the guys who know better. I had to be with Sam longer to understand what not to include. For instance, what I mean is this. If you look at the mechanisms for the ski lifts, they're just 2 little circles. And the ski lift itself is simplified when in fact they're quite complicated. And a lot of people would illustrate this accurately, but you really don't want to do that because we're not doing an illustration here and we're not photographing it, but we're trying to get the most out of a simple joke. So I got to make decisions how to simplify this as simple as possible. And I already explained the background, but the guy going up the hill, even that, there's just the nose. There's just a block for the sunglasses. There's only 1 foot. Everything is economical. What's the most I need to put and still get it across? Does it look okay? It makes every line important. For instance, the guy going up the hill has a shoulder and a hand going to hold a pole. How that line is drawn is crucial. As long as I get that line right, I don't have to do hardly anything else. And if I don't get it right, I'll do it over. But once I have that line right, then I know that the viewer, again, is going to fill it in. The viewer is going to see the other half of that ski lift. The viewer can calculate what the wheels really would be doing to make it go up. And the viewer is filling in the rest of the scene for me. And he's feeling, or she is feeling, a part of this now. Because they're doing some of the heavy lifting. They're imagining what happened right before this. I left it up to the reader to decide that that's Moses coming down. I could have spelled it out and put Moses in a banner. It would have taken away that joy for the reader. I have 2 more examples. I mostly do captionless cartoons. The only problem is most of them, I'm the only person who's ever seen them. They just don't get bought. But I would say that that's my A work.
I thought you were going to say you get paid by the word.
Yeah, I wish. I mean, right now, the whole thing is wacky. I mean, my career is nothing where I thought it was going to be years ago. Everything changed when Trump got elected. When Trump got elected, right around that time, the cartoon landscape collapsed. All the places that I worked for on a regular basis, Harvard Business Review, Barron's, Mad Magazine, Playboy, and the list goes on. All those places went under. The New Yorker changed editors, and I, all of a sudden, was not making a living full-time from just gag cartoons. And I pivoted. I became an art director at a publishing house last year. I teach at NYU. I teach all over. I speak. I do other things because I can't make a living right now solely on cartoons. And I have a folder of cartoons that no one has seen on my desktop. This is a cartoon we're looking at now, though, that was published. And what we have is that little desk toy with the balls that hit each other, but I put it alongside a building as if they were wrecking balls. Now, to me, the way to handle this cartoon best was to be to give the most amount of detail to the joke. The object in front, in the foreground, are rendered the best. And the background is not that important. All I need to do is explain it's a cityscape, and it's better that it's not done well, but loosely, so everyone has a sense of informality looking at the cartoon. That this should not be over rendered. This should not be feeling, staged. Instead, it should be feeling spontaneous if possible.
Bob, something that we probably should be incorporating in the discussion of the gags and the process behind it is the tools that you use. Can you briefly tell us what are your go-to tools to have drawn the gags?
Yeah. Yeah, no. My main tool is drugs. I take lots of drugs. Again, no, I don't take drugs. I don't believe in drugs. And I heard people say that that's how they get creative. I actually had a partner before I did cartoons, when I had a writing partner who used to get high and would laugh at everything. And we never could tell if we had a good joke or not because he would laugh at anything. No, you have to be very sober, I think, with the ideas. The tools really to these cartoons is all in my head. It's just coming up with the ideas. It's overhearing something by mistake. It's mishearing something you overheard at a party. It's writing it down on any type of piece of paper, whether it's on your nightstand when you wake up, or if it's at a movie theater and you have a little light up pen. Everything starts with writing the idea and having that idea. How it's executed later, to me, is very much an afterthought and insignificant. Now, I have talked about techniques and I've talked about the principles with composition. Yes, those are important, but if the joke isn't good, it doesn't make a difference. Now, the drawing, the way I do the drawing is different sometimes than other times. We're looking at a drawing now that I did with ink. I think it was just magic marker, and it was done on watercolor paper, heavy watercolor paper. And then I took some watercolor ink, like black, jet black, just put it on a porcelain tray, add water and a brush, and then I just brushed it on. Not every cartoon is done this way. There have been times in which I would do it on the computer, and I can use a Wacom tablet, use a regular pen, and then print it out onto watercolor paper through a printer. And then I just have the black outline. And then I would add the wash using, again, a brush and a little bit of pigment using like a watercolor pigment. It doesn't always have to be that. Sometimes I can just use India ink with a little bit of water. I often use water a lot to make rough edges. So I wet the paper and then I add a little bit of ink so it spreads and makes accents, which can be nice. And then again, there are times I do work totally digitally. There's a lot of work I do when I have a very tight deadline. Like for instance, this afternoon, I have 2 cartoons to do really quick, and I will do them very fast. And there's no way I have time to do them on regular paper, but instead I will be using my tablet and just sending them off as a digital file. That answer? Or did
That was a fantastic answer. In fact, it was even better answer than my question, because not only did you talk about the physical tools, but you talked about the mental tools too, which is really a fantastic approach to answer that question. So
I do think that a lot of people don't realize that it's really a great idea. It doesn't make a difference. There was the time for a long time I drew with ink and a stick. I mean, a different stick each time, not a regular stick, but just a twig that I would find in the woods, dip it, and I would draw that way. And I did that for years in a style that was very rough. And that's exactly how it worked. I worked sometimes in pencil. I've done work with oil paint. I've done, the digital work and the watercolor. It doesn't make a difference, really. I really feel like it doesn't matter because it's all about the idea and what you're trying to say. And there's so many other ways. Have fun each time you want to do it. I know some people will say, well, what about developing a style and a certain look? You could do that. and that's important. There's importance to that, but I think it's even more important that you love what you do. And if you feel like you need to do something different and challenge yourself, then that's what you should do more so than anything else. Here's another cartoon that I would have done with just a simple black line, and I added wash very loosely on top. This, of course, is not rendered anything special, but it's just all the idea. And a lot of times the joke for me is it's got to start off with something that feels familiar. So in this case, we're looking at a milk container, and we're looking at the side where it always has like the missing kid. But in this case, it's a drawing of a guy who's a contractor. It actually says my contractor. And now this goes back to what I was discussing earlier, where it's up to the reader to piece this together. And they're going to have a eureka moment. And the bigger that eureka moment, the bigger the laugh. And I see this when I do shows, like when I do, I do conventions or I do a banquet and I have to talk about myself. I show my cartoons. I could see the bigger the disconnect in the cartoon, the wider that gap is that the reader's going to have to figure it out, the bigger the laugh.
Yep.
The more obvious, they get to chuckle. But if I can do something where I don't lose them totally, but the joke is still there, it's so satisfying when they figure out what they're looking at.
Hey, when you draw, let me just throw another related question. When you draw a milk carton or anything, are you just pulling it out of the gray matter here, or are you using a visual image as a, like a morgue file?
If I was doing my work right, and I'm telling you these things, this is what I do. Doesn't mean that they're right. There's a lot of things I should do differently. I hear myself doing things and thinking, you know what? I should put more time into it. I should do this and that. So I don't do everything right. And one of the things I don't do right is I rely too heavily on reference. I always tell my students, there's a library in their head that they can refer to. They do not need to go on Google. There are certain times it's important to do that. Let's say you're doing a piece of horse jumping and you need to know the obstacles. But sometimes an elephant drawn without reference is going to be funnier than looking at a photograph. Now, in this case, I looked at a picture of a milk container online. I Googled and I looked up a milk container. And I feel bad now because I know that that is not what I should be doing. I should try to do it by my memory. Memory is always going to be funnier, although it's more work. Now, when I came to the contractor, I learned my lesson and I didn't use a reference, of course. I just went by memory how I was going to do that face. And that's why that face is funnier than it would have been had I looked on Google. But it goes back and forth. It's an ongoing struggle with myself, knowing what I should do, the right way of doing it, and the wrong way. I feel this way with digital work. I often say to myself, do an oil painting. Don't do this on the Wacom tablet. But then there's times where an oil painting is just not practical. I mean, it's just not, especially like, for instance, I was doing the bookstore book. I was starting to do paintings. It's 150 canvases. Well, where the hell am I putting 150 canvases? Instead I had an external hard drive. So there's always that. So it's a back and forth.
Right. There's a certain practical aspect to it at the end of the day too.
Exactly.
Dave, wasn't there a particular cartoonist you wanted to ask about?
Well, I mean, there were a couple of things. One of the things we wanted to ask about, not to take away from the visual discussion here, but we learned last week, very, very prolific, famous cartoonist passed away, Paul Coker. And I was just going to ask, I know I saw some online, postings, and we just wanted to ask you your thoughts about Paul and his work and what he was famous for. I'll let you tell our audience.
No, Dave, thank you. And with your permission, I'd like to repeat a story that I posted. Paul Coker is one of the great Mad magazine cartoonists. He was also responsible for Frosty the Snowman. He had been famous for doing holiday greeting cards. And when they were trying to animate this new Christmas special about Frosty, which was based on a 4-minute animated special that ran each year from 1954, which in turn was based on the Gene Autry song, Frosty the Snowman. They found the greeting cards made by Paul Coker, the style they wanted to use. And then ultimately, they changed that as well. Paul Coker had the style that was very spontaneous and had this energy. It was almost like jazz. The lines would stop and go unexpectedly. They would go from thin to thick, and it was just musical, beautiful. And he also captured facial expressions just marvelously, as so many great mad cartoonists did. There was a whole school, a group of cartoonists back then in that heyday that was just amazing. Mad Magazine from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s. I mean, there was nothing better. It was just amazing. And then I was in Mad Magazine, and I was not in that league, I will tell you. I came after they did. But when I was doing my Snowman book, I wanted to include, of course, something from Mr. Coker, because he created Frosty the Snowman. But I didn't know him. Even though I had worked at Mad Magazine, people were all freelancers coming from different places. So what I did was I did research on him, and I learned that he had done a self-portrait in college that was up for sale at eBay. And I made sure I was the big winner. It didn't sell for a lot. I think I paid $50. And I shocked him by mailing my winning prize to him in New Mexico. That's where he lived. I found his address, and he received this, and we became friends. I told him about my project, and he helped me and cooperated and sent me this beautiful original of Frosty the Snowman that's published in my Snowman book. The name of the book is The Illustrated History of the Snowman. It's a holiday classic. It's been reprinted many times. And his drawing is 10 times better than the Frosty the Snowman we know during the holidays. And that's because the animators who took his template to use for the special had changed it, and they took out everything that was right about Paul Coker, which is that drawings need spit. Drawings need to feel like they were done by the human hand. This is something I see now with cartoons in the New Yorker and a lot of places. Some of the cartoonists have a very computerized look. It looks like it was done by a robot. It loses that spit. It's like, I learned that expression. That's not me. I stole that from Joe Strummer, The Clash.
Mm-hmm.
He was asked, why does he sing the way he does? Why doesn't he pronounce his words better and use some, better diction? And he says the best music has spit in it. And it's true for art. I think the work that looks most personal is the work that reaches the people best.
I love a good Joe Strummer quote.
I agree.
So that was an excellent analogy. Let's talk about this cartoon you have up.
Now, this cartoon, I'm going to use this as an example to show my working process as briefly and as entertaining as could be, and not be excruciatingly dull. But what we have here now is the typical trope of a guru at the top of a mountain. And he has, instead for a head, he has a Rubik's Cube, and he has someone coming up to greet him and to seek advice. And he also is wearing a Rubik's Cube. The Rubik's Cube of the guy coming up who needs answers to life, his Rubik's Cube's all mixed up, and our guru has the solved Rubik's Cube. This cartoon's a favorite of mine because it went viral, and it's very popular in Asia and in South America. On Facebook, it got over 1 million likes. And I've seen it in lots of different places around the world, being stolen at meditation centers or at yoga centers. And in some cases, I actually had to, in some places in America, I actually pursued a lawsuit and got some settlement in some cases where they were using the old cover. So in this particular case, this cartoon started off totally different. It was a guy in prison and his lawyer was coming to visit. And the guy in prison was going, "What do you mean you're going to fire me as my life coach?" Okay, so the reason why I didn't use that cartoon is because it stinks. And I knew that. And that's where you usually start off. You usually start off knowing that the cartoon is not working, but you just keep moving forward. You will find the solution. And with that cartoon, I said, how can I simplify? How can I push this? So I took out the caption and I gave the guy in prison a Rubik's Cube head. And I gave the lawyer a Rubik's Cube head. And then the Rubik's Cube on the lawyer was solved. So now that was a joke. And I did submit that to the New Yorker and they bought that. And this was at a time when the New Yorker was buying from me and my cartoons. I would go at the New Yorker at times selling 5 in a row or 4 in a row. I actually started at the New Yorker. The first cartoon I submitted was bought. So I was on a real hot streak when I started. And that was one of the cartoons. But I knew deep down that cartoon wasn't resolved. I knew that there was a better calling for that setup. And I just put that cartoon aside. And then 2 years later, I realized that this was the setup that was the most satisfying. This is the cartoon setup that would reach most people. And as a result, this cartoon, I'm often asked to have this cartoon on a mug and a t-shirt. I mean, just last week, I had t-shirts made of this again, and there's notebooks made. Somebody sent me a picture of a tattoo of this cartoon, and that's not the first. This cartoon has appeared in all sorts of places. So I'm really proud of that it's something that, well, resonates.
Now, have you ever seen somebody who stole it and ran it in black and white and people said, I don't get it? Tell the kids apart.
I have too many stories of people who have stolen cartoons, and it's frustrating. It's hard enough to make a living. Without that, it's already hard enough. And I understand it too. You just don't realize. I mean, there was a time where we all made tapes for each other of music. It used to be, we used to give a Valentine to someone we liked in school, a tape cassette of songs. I mean, you just don't think from the outsiders of the arts don't realize that this is the way we really, make a living. So I understand, and I also am frustrated. The problem is the arts are not really rewarded. It's just so hard to,
They're emotionally rewarding. They're not financially rewarding. That's what you.
Well, you say emotionally rewarding. I'll share with you a pet peeves exclusive. I am going to therapy because of my frustrations in the cartoon field. It started about 2.5 months ago because I was obsessed with the way things were going with rejection. The fact that I was no longer a player in the cartoon world, and I had finally figured out how to do really strong, excellent cartoons. And just as I figured out this nut, I was sent out to pasture. And I've been going to therapy, and it hasn't helped at all. It just, I'm as a mess as I was before.
It was worth a shot.
I'm in a 12-step program. There's actually certain things I do, which is not look at cartoons for a while, try not to talk about cartoons.
It's hard though, because I'm sure it's just percolating in your head every minute of every day, the seeds of ideas that could potentially be a decent cartoon.
Well, it's not that reminds me. The problem is I get emails and I hear from people throughout the day, from beginning till late. All my friends are cartoonists. everyone's complained to me ranting or praising themselves because they just got a sale, or they want me to help them with a punchline or something. And of course I teach, so that's not helping too much either. So it's around me. It's like coming out of the pores of my skin, cartooning. I can't get away from it. And this is a question for Dave. I do get a real high when I do a cartoon that I know is good. There's a moment that you can't replace when there were times I would go into Bob Mankoff and I knew I sold the cartoon before I showed it to him. I knew that he was going to buy it because I knew I had struck on something by accident, probably. I mean, most of my cartoons are crap, but there's a percentage of my cartoons that work.
Is there a question for me in there? I wasn't sure.
There is. Do you ever get that where you feel you do something that you feel like, oh, this is like you're in a zone?
So there's two answers to this. So the first, I'm going to say, so there definitely is a frustration level with trying to sell work and not getting it sold, or having something that you feel is good and it getting rejected. And so Pete and I think are at the point now where we do it to amuse ourselves. We now have gotten to the point where, like, well, look, we don't know when something is going to sell or when somebody's going to find it fun or somebody's going to find it funny. So as long as we like what we do. And so what part of the answer, I think, is the internal process to get as good as we can be to appease ourselves. And so there are rare times where I draw and I like it. Most of the time I can look at something I did yesterday and hate it. And it's just dreck, not to mention something I did a year ago. But every once in a while, there's that magical moment where I actually like what I drew. And I find that's more rare than not. Now,
Yeah.
Pete's a writer, and I often find his stuff hilarious. I don't know how he feels about that. We can let him answer.
I mean, no, I think any good artist thinks most of their stuff is crap. to quote what Bob just said, you're like, particularly when you look back on it, like you said, Dave, whether it's a week or a year, and more than a year, forget it. It's terrible. Like, or else, if you look back and you think everything you've done is gold, you're not doing it right. I think if you're not hard to please, you're probably not trying hard enough. But yeah, I mean, I think, but a lot of what I do, it's all in how Dave interprets it in the drawing. And I look forward to, I'm sending him ideas and I'm sending him dialogue, and, but that when I get that email or that text from him with the finished product, I open it in excitement every time, because I'm so eager to see what he's done with it. And I think, and that's why we have a particularly good partnership, I think. But
that's great.
It's 60-40 at best.
Now, it's not to say that I'm not an advocate when people say, as long as it makes you happy, because I really believe in the school that your work has to communicate. And if you're not making work that no one else likes, then you are coming up short, that you're not doing what you're supposed to do, which is to communicate. I know a lot of people like to say, just try to make yourself laugh. Well, that's great if you're not doing it professionally. If you're doing it professionally, you have a job description. There's a more responsibility that you're trying to do something that is going to touch people in some way.
Maybe the partnership helps, because when I send Pete the drawing, if he sees something in it that doesn't make sense, he'll let me know, and I can then go back and redraw it if there's a look to the character or what have you. So I would say that the ability for him to bounce his writing off me and me to have his feedback for the drawing helps us sort of edit each other to get to that point, because we have each other as an audience.
And Dave,
and I think Dave must love it when I get back to him and say, give him a little more trepidation in this panel. It's like, I have no idea how you would do that. He must love these descriptions I give him. But
Dave, do you critique Peter's ideas much, or do you feel like you trust him that he knows best?
When with the writing, when he sends me so he'll send me the script first. I feel like he knows what he's doing with the writing. My comments tend to be sometimes it could be an edit just to get the words more concise, or I'm trying to think. So
right.
like,
I can't always picture what, like David has better understanding of how the characters, because it's a traditional comic strip with, with a character and a plot of sorts to get to the gag. So Dave has a better understanding of where the characters have to be in relation to each other. I picture it in my head, but then he's like, unless this guy's here, this guy's here, this is not going to work, and I'll go back to the.
I mean, there, we're working in, small boxes, so there may be a gag that he writes where he has, the entire family in one box, but a lot of text, and I just know it's not going to work. There's too many words and too many characters, so I'll suggest either breaking it up or not having as many characters in that particular panel, or I'll, maybe structuring it visually slightly different than he sort of gives me on the stage direction. We do that.
Right, yeah.
But, it is one of the most interesting things about, we don't have too much time left, but, for us in terms of speaking to cartoonists on this podcast, first of all, they're like the nicest people in the world. Like, we have yet to meet a cartoonist we didn't like, to paraphrase Will Rogers. But it's so interesting to hear how everybody approaches the job and their process and what they ask of themselves and who they admire. So, and I know you've done, you're actually have, in addition to being interviewed quite often, you've interviewed other cartoonists as well. Have you found a similar experience in terms of chatting with your fellow cartoonists?
No. It's case by case. For me, a lot of them are friends. So we have a different type of relationship. I'm going to share on the screen really quickly. This is we have a podcast. I do a podcast with someone else too, who's a total royal pain in the ass. But people tell me that they learn things from our podcast, because we do have like Michael Maslin, and we have Mort Gerberg, and we have a lot of people on who are really experienced, and they know the real nuts and bolts of the business. And so it is a privilege to talk to them. And well, hopefully we're trying to be entertaining too. So we don't go too deep, but it's a funny thing. I am heartbroken by this business going through what it's going through, which is that it is a tough business now. The real estate is getting smaller and smaller. So it's really tough. And I wish there was some solutions. I wish that these conversations that I have on my podcast resulted in some sort of answers. The only thing I could think of was I came up with a collection of cartoon books. I did a series of 3, and that was just to try to create more of a stage for a lot of people who no longer had a place to share their cartoons. And the cartoon in these cartoon books are beautiful, but unfortunately, that's far and few between. It's an oasis.
That's the ultimate book of blank cartoons, right? Whatever.
Well, there was one book called Everyone's a Critic, and that has got the best cartoons from the leading cartoonists. It's amazing. And then the last book is called All's Fair in Love and War. And all 3 books are beautifully produced by Princeton Architectural Press. And they themselves are going through troubles. They're being bought out. It's like everywhere you look, everyone's being gobbled up. It's really a shame. And those books, they were beautiful, but they came out during the pandemic, and they were meant to be coffee table books. You see, everything with me is to support independent bookstores. So those books were not really an Amazon book. They were not a book that was being advertised on Amazon or anything. I wanted people to buy them in bookstores that were closed during the time of the pandemic. So it's just really bad timing, and that's just the way it goes.
Well, I did. After we spoke last time, I had it in the back of my mind. I don't remember if it was, maybe it was right before. Actually, I think it was when they finally opened. I went to one of my local bookstores, Jabberwocky in Newburyport, Massachusetts. I'll give them a plug right now because they're a great locally owned independent bookstore. And I bought the Critics one. I was happy to find it on the shelf there. And I said, Bob would be proud of me for buying this from my local bookstore.
And now here's your chance to be a critic. How many stars do you give it?
Oh, it's easily 5, and I think I did give it 5 stars on Goodreads. We could look it up after this.
Thanks. Do you like those type of cartoons? Do you find, like, what is the work that you guys both get inspired by yourself?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I love panel cartoons. You know, it's not something we dabble in it at best, but it's more like panel cartoons featuring our characters every so often. Like they're not sort of traditional New Yorker style cartoons, but you know, I mean, I think were inspired growing up by the great, you know, we already talked about Schultz and Peanuts, and you know, when we were saying in college was the heyday of Calvin and Hobbes and Doonesbury and Blue County, and you know, the classics of the 80s. And I know I still go back and reread those a lot of the time. But yeah, but those, you know, to answer your question, you know, I love flipping through the books of panels by different cartoonists and seeing, you know, the different takes. I recently got, you know, Steve Martin is writing panel cartoons now, I'm sorry, I forget the artist he's working with.
Bliss, right?
Harvey Bliss.
Yes. And the art is really good. I was, to be honest, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't weirder. I was remembering his Cruel Shoes days, I think, and thinking that these might be some really sort of avant-garde cartoons, but they were kind of your standard panel punch.
Sorry about that interruption in the back. I was just robbed.
I will tell you this, just to briefly answer your question about what inspires me, there's a lot of cartoonists who inspire me. And so I don't want to name names, but something I like to look for visually is the cartoonists who can represent things, as you were talking about, like with the skier and the ski lift. I like looking at seeing how people draw items and what they don't draw within the item, but still represent the item. And I really like to study that because it's very hard to get the minimum amount of lines to get the idea across. And I like to see how people do that.
Yep, I agree with you, Dave.
Now,
it's like it's the space between the musical notes, to go back to that metaphor.
Now, before we wrap up, and I can't believe we're already at an end here. This has been a terrific discussion with Bob Eckstein, for those of you who tuned in late. But I should ask, you know, we're up in Boston. We just mentioned the Harvard bookstore. And there were a few Boston references in the book of cat names. I know Fenway was one of the suggestions. So for our listeners, our Boston listeners who might be in the market for a cat or dog, but obviously we're talking about cats here. Any Boston related name recommendations for them?
I'm going to throw out one that's not in the book, but just came up with it now. Baked beans.
Baked beans.
I don't even know what that means. And why did I come up with that? But I just threw it out. Or how about Red Sox?
Well, I think, yeah, because obviously there have been cats named Socks. I think didn't the Clintons have a cat named Socks?
And a cat named
Let's forget that. Let's start fresh. Cut this out. Let's do a cat that gives you trouble, like a cat that's really annoying. Let's call it Buckner.
He always comes up eventually.
It always comes back to that. I had a circle back. It's a callback.
The poor
we
guy.
can at least mention the man's name now that the Sox have at least won some World Series. I mean, before 2004, I don't think we would be able to.
And after they won, I forget which World Series, because they've won 3 in recent years. They brought Buckner out and he got a standing ovation at Fenway. I think we all, felt a little better for him then. Poor guy.
It's not too soon.
No, not at all.
I'll tell you what I do like is when a thief feels so much guilt that they come back to the scene of crime and they return the items. You don't see that too often.
You don't.
It is nice when it happens. Bob, can you tell our listeners and viewers where they could find the book on cat names, your snowman book, your bookstore book, anything else involving your work that they might want to pick up or take a look at?
Oh, thank you very much. Well, you can see some of my work on my website, bobeckstein.com, and it's ECKSTEIN.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. The books are available anywhere where bookstores are. If you get a chance to go to your local bookstore, it's always better if you're able to support them, because they're paying for our town structure, that they're paying taxes that go to our police and our schools, and the bigger places that we buy sometimes online, they're not doing that, and they're not supporting our local neighborhoods. So I try to remind people of that. And if you can't get to a local bookstore, there's this nice website called bookshop.org. And what they do is they sell books. They have all my books. I have two new books I should mention. One is the complete book of cat names that your cat won't answer to anyway. And the other book is The Elements of Stress, which if anyone out there is really stressed out, that's a great book for you. I marked both books as cheap as could be because I wanted people to really enjoy them. The stress book is only $10. There's like nothing $10 anymore. That's how much it costs now to get the lunch special at Ho 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 Kitchen. And then there's the cat book is only $15. And it's a beautiful hardcover book, so it's not even cheaply made. And those books can be bought at bookshop.org, who gives proceeds to independent bookstores. So it's a win-win, and they're really good people.
Yeah, I love bookshop.org. Like to plug them whenever we can.
And thank you for letting me plug the books and stuff and come on. It's really enjoyable to have this type of conversation talking about cartoons, because I do love it. And you guys have a great website. I am a listener. I listen to your podcast. So, this has been nice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great having you, Ed. And this was a terrific conversation. Everybody, please check out Bob's work and make sure to tune in next month, where you have a very exciting special guest in the works for September. I'm not going to spoil it, but check back and you won't be disappointed. Bob, thank you again. Dave, thank you as always. And everyone else, we will see you on the next episode of Strip Search, the comic strip podcast. Thanks, everybody.